Okay, welcome back. Hour number 3. It's Monday. That means we're going to take a look at the greatest natural disaster, unnatural disaster, greatest catastrophe environmentally of recorded history, at least so far. And that, of course, is the Fukushima disaster. Up first this half hour, we'll be going to Yoichi Shimatsu. The second half hour is Michael Collins, who is the proprietor, of course, with Denise, of the EnviroReporter.com website. Much honored for their work, of course. I hope you know that by now. If you've been listening, you do. And all you have to do is read the headlines to understand what's happening. If you look down the center at Rense.com, just read them. Read them. Total cesium released into the air is at least 300% more than the amount admitted by TEPCO. At least. It's unknown why Reactor 1 exploded. Folks, they don't even know. They don't know how Unit 2 released so much more radiation than it was supposed to, or what was thought. Fukushima workers are dying. Young men dying with weird cancers and other issues. So they're running out of volunteers. You've heard that before as well. The Japanese government cover-up of the health impacts from the radiation are becoming more known now. They are quite disgusting. A Japanese hotel is now giving masks and coats to its guests for radiation protection, and it warns them that if they go out in the rain, they may get dosed, as it were. And then, of course, the outstanding paper by Dr. Richard Wilcox, No Safe Dose, Japan's low-dose radiation disaster. And it goes on from there. All you have to do is just read the headlines if you want to stay up to date. You can click on those, of course, and read the whole stories. Hello, Michael. Welcome back.
Hey there, Jeff. Thank you very much. You know, that's all bad news. We have plenty of bad news for you. Got a little good news to begin, but it is basically light good news. In Southern California, over the last few days, we've had smattering of showers, and all of them did not show any indications of increased radioactivity that would be coming from Fukushima.
Good.
That's real good. It also shows, you know, when you're testing, if you get 0, that will tell you something. And since we've had over 1,600 tests at Radiation Station Santa Monica, and we know what our background is. When we tested this rain, it didn't cause any bump at all. The very initial rain, meaning that the so-called radon progeny or radioactive gas in the air is non-existent in this area. So it helps us keep an eye on our quality control, so we give you good numbers. But I have to tell you, Jeff, there has been some news in just the last week that is astonishing. You know, we have, on one hand, we have a report that came out of the University of Stanford, in which a fellow claimed that there would be 1,300 cancers around the world due to Fukushima's triple meltdowns, melt-outs, melt-throughs, and just 1,300.
1,300 around the world.
Around the world.
That's absurd, of course.
That's right. And that the most likely morbidity rate amongst the workers at the plant would be between 2 and 12 men. This came out of the University of Stanford. Now, of course, this makes headlines all over the place. Oh, gosh, that's great. Just 1,300 cancers and maybe a few deaths. And you see that this fellow also says the good news is that 81% of all that fallout didn't land on Japan. It went into the ocean and around the world. So isn't that good news? But this report, Jeff, isn't really worth spending the jaw time on, but I just want to point out for folks that have seen this report, it was done by a guy who's a civil engineer. Now, what does a civil engineer know about mortality rates? Nothing. So that's one thing. However, we got a report, Jeff, that is, oh, my, and it is Japanese testing of their fish that has created a furor in British Columbia. We know we have a lot of Canadian listeners, and for good reason. you folks have been on the receiving end of a whole lot of fallout. And I don't know if you know about this report, Jeff, but in June, 56% of the Japanese catch tested by the Japanese government was contaminated with cesium-137 and 134. Only 9.3% of this catch, though, exceeded Japan's official ceiling for cesium, which is 100 becquerels per kilogram. That's a high level, but it's not nearly as high as Canada.
Right.
And Canada's, it's many multiples times. I think it's 1,000 times. So what this Japanese government survey, Jeff, is the best one done on fish so far that explores a whole bunch of fish, landlocked and seagoing fish in Japan. And folks might think, well, if it's landlocked, like landlocked salmon, which is such an animal, then we don't have to worry about it. Well, that's not true, because the Japanese, just like any other society, harvest their fish and they ship it to you. And we have the numbers on exactly how much the Canadians have been eating of this stuff. The Japanese Fisheries Agency, Jeff, did 14,000 commercial fish tests since March 11th. It's the most comprehensive in the world. It shows real problems with some of our most popular fish: cod, sole, halibut, landlocked kokanee, carp, eel, trout. And the numbers are astonishing. There was a landlocked Masu salmon caught in a Japanese river, and this stuff is exported to Canada. We have those numbers. It came in at a whopping 18,700 becquerels of cesium per kilogram. Becquerels of cesium per kilogram.
18,000. Wow.
18,700. Now, this fish is being shipped to all over the world. It's being shipped to America, and it's being processed here, and then off to Canada it goes. Except for the species of sole and cod, these fish that I just mentioned and others tested their highest in 2012, not 2011, which goes right into what we were talking about last week in terms of bioaccumulation in our biggest and most mobile fish. That's not good. Japan, to go back, Japan has 100 becquerels per kilogram ceiling for cesium in food. Canada is that 1,000. That's why it can be sold in Canada. And the amount sold in Canada is known. We know that just in the first 4 months of 2012, there were tens of thousands of dollars of Pacific Atlantic Danube type of salmon sold to Canada. And in that mix is thought to be this so-called Masu. These folks that put this article together, a very good publication out of Vancouver, I mean, this is just top-notch journalism. Straight.com. They got that interesting name. They put in calls to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and they said, yes, actually, we do have an imported shipment from October 2011 of massive salmon, and it wasn't tested for radiation. And no, we don't have anybody available to answer your question. And what we have here is we have, as we know, we've talked about, Canada has stopped and dismantled their ability to test ocean-going animals for radiation. And so what we're left with here is we're left with the Japanese on the other side, and dare I say, any numbers coming out of the Japanese government are not going to be considered absolutely trustworthy. And then we have nothing going on over here. This report, Straight.com, is so shocking that anybody in Canada who reads this and continues to eat sea fish, sea creatures out of the Pacific, has got to have their head examined. But what do you think about some of those numbers? Now, but I'm going to tell you another number that is truly astonishing. In Canada, the ceiling for radiation is set at a level that whatever it is you're ingesting over a lifetime period, they call 70 years, that amount of radiation, this is for radiation, allows for 5,000 to 8,000 people to die of, or to get cancer from that level of radiation, expecting about half to die. In the United States of America, our goal is 1 in a million. So 5,000 to 8,000 in a million for the Canadians, 1 in a million for America. And yet we have other levels for radiation and chemicals that don't match up to the Canadians, but the Canadians are much stricter. Check this out. For chemical carcinogens, it's down to 1 to 10 people, 1 to 10 cancers per million. Yet radiation, 5,000 to 8,000 people per million. So if I were in Canada and I was looking at that package that says fish on it, I'd sure the heck know where it came from. And anything, say, West Vancouver, I'd bag on it.
Very
That's
interesting.
just one of many things. This particular, we're getting reports this week that are just astonishing. Now, I know Yoshi's got lots of information, but I'm going to just have to break this one. 36, and it's on Rense.com, folks, 36% of Fukushima kids have abnormal thyroid growths.
Yeah, they already have nodules. It's just heartbreaking. Just sickening.
It is sickening. But the crimes against Japanese children continue unabated. There's a city in the south of Japan. It's called Kitakyushu City. It's on the Kyushu Island at the very southern end of Japan.
Right.
The mayor has been stepping up saying, we want that radioactive debris and goo from Fukushima Prefecture and Sendai and those areas around there that were destroyed by the tsunami that should be left alone and never touched again, unfortunately, but that's the way it is. We want that radioactive material and the money it brings to burn down here. And what they did, Jeff, is they put out a pamphlet for 4th to 6th graders that talks about how okay it is.
It actually makes the air cleaner after they burn the radioactive debris.
You see that.
Yeah.
And, of course, don't rumor monger, kids.
No.
So that's an amazing development out of Japan. We have the former Japanese prime minister saying we've got to end all nuclear power, period, in Japan by 2025. And he's appearing now at these growing anti-nuclear rallies. We have the current prime minister saying, you know what, you're getting through to me. I am going to pay attention, which, as Jeff knows, I know, and probably most of you know, is sort of a stiff arm. I'm going to really pay attention to what you have to say, and then I'm going to do the opposite. At least that's what we see. We see workers going into Fukushima Daiichi, which is what, Jeff, about 130 miles north of Tokyo, not that far away. Workers afraid of getting so much radiation that they won't be allowed to come back to work and make the money, being given lead sheets protectors, sort of like pocket protectors,
Mm-hmm.
to put over their dosimeters before they head into units 1, 2, or 3. Because you go over on your dosage, you don't get to work here. And the pressure on workers who don't want to do this is so intense that they're basically let go before the shift, because you don't want some guy coming on the shift with you that doesn't have his Geiger counter badge adding up the dosage.
It's amazing to even read stuff like this.
You don't want that guy. You don't want that guy that knows.
No.
That guy who can't get a job. That guy who is from a village in Japan on the other
Mm-hmm.
side of the country.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want that guy who cares about his health to not put that thing on, because then everybody's readings won't add up. And this is Japan, folks. This isn't some kind of, backwards country that's never heard of, say, radiation. There's a heartbreaking, Jeff, video out of Japan of an American guy going to pick up his kid at school, at a nursery school,
Uh-huh.
and it shows him going into it, and he might not be picking up his kid, but I think he is. Japanese wife, he pulls up to this school. It's right outside the 30-kilometer exclusion zone. And he drives up, and it looks like a hazmat situation. There's a few dozen guys in fully outfitted, head-to-toe, white suits with dosimeters. He stands there. He gets completely wanded down. And if anybody's ever been patted down by the TSA in an airport, that's nothing compared to what these workers with their Geiger counters were doing, testing this guy as he drove up. Now, he went into the school, and the headmistress actually talked with him. And some of it's just astonishing the kind of thing that young people in Japan are being exposed to, because folks either don't know what to do, or they do listen to their government that says it's going to be okay, and they want to believe it, but the numbers don't add up. You know, when we see these stories, Jeff, I'm always astonished by the use of background versus the readings they're finding, because inevitably the background, anywhere that I've seen them doing this in Japan, is somewhere between 8 to 10 times the background in Los Angeles. And the background in Los Angeles is abnormally high, about 3 times what it should be.
What's it running now?
It's still around 0.012 to 0.013 millisieverts per hour.
What's that in counts?
That's in counts. You're looking at about 42 to 46 counts per minute.
Uh-huh.
We talked about this before, we've had a lowering of what we're picking up in our HEPA filters, which we're going to be retesting and showing you real soon. We've had a lowering of the count in them, and the only thing that we can see different is less chemtrails in the period of time that the readings have gone down. Now, it doesn't prove that when the readings go up that it's chemtrail related because there were more chemtrails, but you cannot ignore the one major factor environmentally between one period of time. The last period of time we tested, we were on Attack of the Show, a popular NBC show showing people this stuff. There's no accounting for the major difference unless it is something you can really see something major. But we're going to be getting into that. There are slight breaks in mainstream media that we've seen in the covering of this. Unfortunately, in Bloomberg News, the mistakes and the presumptions that they make are just so numerous it's hard to believe. But the New York Times came out with a piece about going to Japan. I think you mentioned it at the top of the show.
Yep.
And I'm sorry I haven't taken a breath. And but I will in a second. This fella goes to a sort of a B&B Japanese style, and beautiful. Gets an 11-course meal served to his room, and goes out, and they give him the old raincoat and the face mask and the umbrella, and they say, well, you know, if it rains, you might want to put these on. Well, the guy goes outside, puts his detector covered in plastic, so he's not picking up alpha, so these readings are lower than what they really are. He puts his detector on the ground, Jeff, where water's running into a drain. That water right next to this B&B was 1,984 times Los Angeles' background, almost 2,000 times LA's background. And you look down the street, it's raining in Japan, beautiful, beautiful village, not a soul on the street, and yet the city's alive. Now, folks, this segment of the show is actually about North American radiation exposure from Fukushima. And I'm just going to have to tell you, except for places like over here at Radiation Station Santa Monica, or the one we have in Glendale, or the one in Pacifica, south of San Francisco, that just reported in saying we've had pretty normal radiation testing that ocean water, want some advice on testing the Pacific because of that sea of goo that's coming towards us. The difference between what we were supposed to have been talking about and what we've been talking about is we are getting numbers out of Japan. We're not getting them here, and it's because the Canadian and American government said sayonara to keeping you safe. Now, this is something I say every week.
Yeah.
But it doesn't change the fact that every week people have to do it. And as you know, Jeff, vacation time, got to put on those N95 masks. Jeff was right last week. I brought up a mask that gets 100% P100 or something like that.
Yeah, P100.
But you sweat too much on your face, you won't use it. You don't use it, you get nothing.
No, it can become contaminated, too. You don't want to mess with that.
Right.
Better to have a cheap disposable than something you wear over and over again that becomes contaminated. You take it in the house with you, you pick it up, you know, whatever.
That's right. Now, you know, I've tested some Japanese products, obviously. High radiation in seaweed, beer, pastry, all sorts of things. Bluefin tuna, yellowfin tuna.
Right.
Recently gotten seaweed high again. But I've also tested a brand new Toyota Prius. Neighbor of mine bought it, and she let me crawl all over that car. Nothing in it. Great news. Except for the problem is, that was just me testing it. Let's go to Russia. Russia, since the meltdowns began, has inspected 150,000 vehicles coming into the Soviet Union, or the former Soviet Union.
Yeah.
300 of them were hot.
That's really not much, but it's